Hi, I'm Tucker. Today we're counting down the ultimate ride or die influencers who actually chose to die for a viral video. From an influencer who treated a roller coaster like a treadmill, riding it over and over for the camera, to a daredevil who climbed to the top of an observation tower and never came back down. It was the 22nd of July, 2015 in Orlando, Florida. A regional park was packed under the summer sun, which had pushed the temperature above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and somewhere inside the thrill ride sector, a young woman was setting up a camera and telling her live stream audience she was ready. Lena Vale was 26 years old, slim and polished, and carefully camera ready, a wellness influencer whose online platform was built around calorie control and weight loss routines, and had the disciplined appearance of someone who had everything under control. And she had not eaten a proper meal that day because she wanted to look right on camera, living instead on caffeine and small snacks, while the Florida heat built steadily around her. She was not an endurance athlete and had never pretended to be, but weeks earlier, a fitness creator had publicly tagged her in a viral amusement park challenge, joking that she would tap out after a few rides. Lots of comments had piled up daring her to prove otherwise, and Lena had agreed to do it live because the alternative was letting the mockery stand, and that felt worse than anything a roller coaster could do to her. I find it strange that she didn't eat because she wanted to look good for the camera. The thing that was supposed to make her look strong was already making her fragile before the first ride even started. She did not fully understand what repeated coaster cycling combined with heat and dehydration and continuous vomiting would actually do to a body that had not been properly fed or hydrated, and nobody around her understood it clearly enough to stop what was coming. The challenge began just after noon, with Lena laughing through the early rides and joking dramatically for the camera, the high-speed steel launch coaster throwing her through rapid acceleration and aggressive directional changes cycle after cycle, while the afternoon heat pressed down on everything. Within the first hour, she was vomiting near the ride exit, telling the camera it was just motion sickness, telling her crew she was fine, getting back in the queue, and as the afternoon deepened, the vomiting kept coming, and her speech began to slow, and her balance became unsteady, and she started losing count of how many cycles she had completed, her crew correcting her on camera while viewers watching the live stream began leaving comments saying something looked wrong. I have thought about that more than once. Thousands of strangers watching a screen could tell something was wrong before the people right there, and nobody next to her could act on it on time. Park employees eventually approached her and told her to sit down and get medical help, and she looked at them and turned toward the queue staircase, telling them how stopping meant losing, and losing publicly after days of audience buildup felt like the only outcome she could not survive. On the elevated metal staircase leading back up to the coaster platform, her body finally made the decision for her, her coordination giving way without warning, sending her sideways into the stair structure and then down onto the concrete below, the live stream cutting off as guests and staff rushed toward her. Lena died from traumatic injuries sustained in the fall, medical findings also identifying severe heat stroke, dehydration, and prolonged vomiting as the factors that had steadily dismantled her physical awareness and judgment long before she reached those stairs. I believe her body had been making the decision for hours because by the time she fell, she had already lost the ability to judge how badly she was doing. The stairs only just made it final. The investigation found no fault with the park or the ride itself, only the accumulation of hours of ignored warning signs. The fitness creator who had started everything later removing the original challenge videos after public backlash, and the park introduced stricter intervention policies for guests showing visible signs of heat illness. The last thing Lena's audience saw before the stream cut out was someone who had confused not quitting with being safe, when by then the two things had long since stopped being the same. Lena's story ended in the middle of a crowd, with cameras running and staff watching and nobody able to stop it in time. The next one is almost the opposite. A dark, abandoned structure, a man alone, and a structure that had been waiting years for someone to trust it one last time. It was the 18th of October, 2017, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. An old popular roller coaster stood dark and silent outside the city, its wooden bones creaking in the cold night air, waiting for the demolition crew that would tear it down in just a few days. Tim Cole was 28 years old, and he made documentary videos about abandoned places, filming them before they disappeared forever, building an audience who loved watching him walk through forgotten corners of the world. When news broke that the old roller coaster was coming down, Tim announced online that he would film the final walkthrough of the coaster before it was gone, a last record of something the city was about to lose forever. People warned him not to go inside. Former workers wrote in the comments that the wooden structure had been rotting for years, that sections of the walkways had already been flagged as dangerous long before the park even closed. Former workers, people who had actually been inside that structure, wrote to him directly about the extent of the damage. "I still do not understand how you ignore that." Tim heard them, but he believed he could move carefully, stay on the main paths, and get out safely. He arrived after sunset with his camera operator, slipping in through a gap in the rusted fencing, carrying lights and equipment into the cold, dark property. Inside, everything was still and broken. Peeling paint, sagging walkways, handrails that came loose when touched, the whole structure groaning softly as wind moved through the upper framework. Tim filmed as he walked, narrating the history of the ride in the darkness below. But slowly, almost without realizing it, he pushed further than he had planned, climbing the steep maintenance walkway that ran alongside the lift hill, going higher and higher, while his camera operator stayed below. At around 8:16 that evening, the wood beneath him cracked. A section of the walkway had pulled away from its rusted supports, and as Tim shifted his weight trying to steady himself, the movement broke more of the weakened boards beneath his feet. The walkway gave way, and he fell through the side of the structure, striking wooden crossbeams on the way down before hitting the heavy support framing below. He had planned to stay on the main paths. I believe that. I think most people who end up in these situations start with a plan that sounds reasonable. It is the slow drift from it that nobody notices until it is too late. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but could not reach him safely until debris was stabilized around him, and Tim was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators found that the walkway had been deteriorating for years. Rotted wood, corroded bolts, water damage soaking into the frame through every winter, none of it visible in the dark until it was already too late. The coaster demolition proceeded 4 days later, under controlled conditions, and only portions of the station entrance were preserved for historical display by a local amusement history organization. Tim's final footage was never released, and the last thing his camera captured before the fall was the lift hill climbing silently upward into the dark sky above him. Tim went in after dark to document something the world was about to lose, and the structure took him before he could finish. The next story also involves a man chasing one final shot, except this time it was not darkness that hid the danger. It was the wind, and he knew it was there. It was on the 18th of September 2016, San Diego, California. A large coastal amusement park remained crowded into sunset hours as late summer tourism and seasonal promotional events pushed attendance near operational peak capacity. Evan Stones was 28 years old, and he had built a large online following, people who tuned in for the thrill of watching him climb where he wasn't supposed to climb, film where he wasn't supposed to film, and go where nobody else dared to go. He called it raw realism, and for a long time it worked, but the numbers had been slipping, and newer creators were pushing harder and taking bigger risks, and Evan felt the pressure growing with every upload that underperformed. So he planned one final shot for his new video, a sunset sequence from the top of the park's famous observation tower, 240 feet above the ground. No harness, no safety lines, nothing between him and the open sky. I keep coming back to that phrase, one final shot. I do not think he meant it the way it turned out. I think he meant it the way creators always mean it. One more video, one more win, one more reason for the audience to stay. What Evan didn't know, or perhaps didn't care about, was that coastal wind advisories had been active all evening, with upper-level gusts swinging between 28 and 38 miles per hour around the tower's exposed exterior. He noticed something else instead, a maintenance access gate on the western side of the deck that hadn't latched properly after an earlier inspection, a small gap in the system, just wide enough for someone determined enough to use it. At 7:11 that evening, he launched his compact drone from inside the rotating viewing deck, then guided it through the unsecured gate and out into the open air, where the wind immediately threw it sideways. He tried again and again to stabilize the shot, but the crosswinds kept pushing the drone off course, the sunset slipping further away with every failed attempt. At 7:18, he stepped over the waist-high safety barrier and moved into the restricted maintenance corridor, ignoring the guests around him who called out warnings about the wind. The exterior catwalk was built for trained engineers wearing tethered harnesses clipped to fixed anchor points along the structure, and it had never been designed or rated for anyone else. Evan had none of that. He stood on the graded metal platform with a camera in one hand and a drone controller in the other, speaking into the lens about fighting the wind and chasing the perfect final shot, while the tower hummed and swayed around him in the gusts. At 7:24, a crosswind exceeding 46 miles per hour struck the western face of the tower, throwing him sideways into the railing, knocking the camera from his grip and splitting his attention between his footing and the drifting drone above him. Seconds later, another gust hit, and with his weight already off balance, his body shifted over the low maintenance rail, and he fell. Paramedics reached him within minutes, but his injuries were catastrophic, and he was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the regional trauma center. His drone was found in the landscaping below, out of power, the footage inside it cutting off somewhere over the Pacific. The investigation found no fault with the tower, no mechanical failure, no structural defect, only a young man who crossed every barrier placed between him and the edge, chasing a video that was never finished. The camera recovered from the catwalk still held the last frames he captured, a sky full of color and a shot he never got. Following the incident, the park installed upgraded electronically monitored access locks, expanded upper tower surveillance coverage, and implemented automated control room alerts for unauthorized maintenance corridor entry. Evan fell chasing a sunset from a place he was never supposed to stand. The next story also takes place behind a barrier the public was never meant to cross. Except this time the danger was not the wind. It was a machine that did not know anyone had walked into its path. It was September 18th, 2016 in Japan. In the backstage maintenance corridor of an entertainment resort in eastern Japan, a place built for wonder on the outside but ran like a factory floor behind the curtains, and that distinction was about to change someone's life. On that day, the resort was carrying out scheduled maintenance inside one of its flagship attractions, a facility that combined robotics, hydraulic motion systems, synchronized stage platforms, and human-sized figures. Maintenance windows between guest cycles were often compressed during busy periods, forcing testing and preparation to overlap. The backstage area was separated from public access by corridors, temporary gates, and marked floor boundaries rather than fully solid barriers. Among the invited media guests that day was Francis Wright, a 31-year-old technology influencer from the United Kingdom, who had built a strong online following through content focused on robotics demonstrations, engineering tours, and behind-the-scenes theme park technology. He was on a multi-country Asian content tour, with the Japan visit positioned as a key stop due to the country's reputation for advanced robotics in entertainment. Guests were told to stay inside the marked observation areas and not enter active maintenance zones without a supervising technician. Later testimony revealed that these instructions were not always communicated clearly during transitions between test cycles. Warning lights and audio alerts are only activated during certain movement phases rather than running continuously. I have to be honest here. The instructions and warnings were not communicated clearly. I think that matters a lot when you have unprofessional guests. At around 4:18 in the afternoon, technicians began a controlled movement test to check how well the animatronics' rotating base and arms were lining up during operation. The maintenance floor was divided into 3 separate areas: a marked corridor where observers were meant to stand, a service walkway used by the engineers, and an active motion zone that surrounded the base of the animatronic itself. Francis had been filming from the designated corridor with the media group, but visibility of the mechanism was partially blocked from that position. During a brief moment when engineers moved to a side console to review calibration readings, Francis stepped closer to the boundary and then entered the restricted maintenance floor with his handheld camera rig. At roughly the same moment, the system moved into its next automated alignment sequence. The base platform engaged, and the animatronic rotated more quickly than the previous phase, with one articulated arm sweeping downward as part of its programmed arc. Francis attempted to step back, but a fixed maintenance railing and structural frame blocked his retreat. Emergency stop controls were triggered within seconds, but hydraulic inertia meant the movement did not stop instantly. I think that was hydraulic inertia. The stop button was pressed, and it still was not fast enough. I find that one of the hardest details in this story. Someone did the right thing, and it still did not matter. Francis sustained severe crush injuries and internal trauma and was transported to a regional trauma center. He was pronounced dead that evening. Following the incident, the resort suspended all backstage media access to active maintenance areas and introduced interlocked access gates tied directly to the motion control systems. Investigators concluded the system had operated within its programmed parameters, but identified several procedural failures, including inconsistent communication of motion cycle status among staff, limited visibility of warning indicators from certain angles, and a gap in media escort coverage during the transition between test cycles. Francis stepped into a machine that was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The next story involves a man who walked into a place that looked completely still and had no idea that underneath the silence something was still very much running. On the night of the 14th of November 2018 in Kansas City, an indoor water park outside the city sat quiet and dark, closed for the off-season while renovation crews worked through its aging attractions before the following summer. Daniel Vance was 26 years old, a travel content creator with a growing online following built entirely around upbeat tourism, resort walkthroughs, ride reviews, and family-friendly destinations across the United States. His audience loved him for his enthusiasm and his warmth, and they trusted him to take them somewhere worth visiting every single time. That night, he had something a little different in mind. Daniel had heard through local online discussions that River Caverns, a slow-moving themed raft ride built beneath the park's main complex in the late 1990s, had been drained and partially dismantled ahead of renovation. He wanted to film a short, nostalgic piece about a once-loved attraction before the work changed it forever. He did not think of it as dangerous. He just saw it as a story. I believe that completely. Daniel was not a thrill seeker by any measure. He made warm, cheerful videos about places families loved. I think he genuinely walked in there that night believing he was doing something harmless and kind. Shortly after midnight, he entered a restricted service corridor carrying a handheld camera, portable LED lights, and a backpack of spare batteries. Several warning barriers had been moved earlier that week by contractors, leaving sections of the corridor poorly secured, and Daniel moved through without any real resistance. For nearly 40 minutes, he filmed quietly, narrating the drained channel, the exposed beams, the dismantled cave scenery, and the faded theming of an attraction that thousands of families had once loved. He seemed relaxed and completely unaware of what was still running beneath his feet, because while the ride channel above was empty and dark, the underground service system was still very much alive, pumping water through lower reservoirs overnight for mechanical testing, automated systems that did not know or care that someone was walking above them. At 17 minutes past 1 in the morning, a scheduled flush cycle activated several pumps deep inside the underground infrastructure. Daniel had moved toward a partially uncovered maintenance opening in the ride floor, trying to film the underground tunnels more closely. The steel grate covering the access shaft had not been fully secured after contractor work earlier that evening. As the pumps activated and water began moving through the lower channels, the grate shifted under his weight and gave way. He fell into the service shaft below, struck the concrete wall on the way down, and the sudden rush of water swept him further into the filtration corridor before he could recover. Nobody heard anything above the noise of the pumps and ventilation systems. Just over an hour later, a maintenance technician noticed unusual pressure readings and entered the attraction to investigate. He was down there for over an hour before anyone noticed the pressure readings were off. I find that the loneliest detail in this whole story. They found the displaced grate, the damaged recording equipment, and then Daniel, inside a partially submerged lower service tunnel. Emergency responders arrived and shut the systems down, but it was already too late. The investigation found that Daniel had never truly understood what was still running beneath the drained ride, and that the attraction's silence above the surface had given no warning whatsoever about the activity below it. The park was cited for inadequate access controls and unsecured maintenance covers during overnight operations, and new lockout procedures were introduced in the weeks that followed. River Caverns was demolished entirely during the renovation that followed. Daniel had walked into what looked like an empty, forgotten place and found something still very much alive waiting underneath. Daniel found danger hiding beneath a surface that looked completely still. The next story takes place in a very different kind of silence, the quiet of a restricted corridor in a theme park on a busy summer evening, where a man kept walking forward even as every warning around him said, "Stop." It was the 14th of July, 2017 in Orlando, Florida. Thousands of guests had gathered at a park for the summer finale, music playing across the grounds. Children lined up the barriers, waiting for the fireworks launch. Andrew George was 26 years old and lived alone in a rented apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, a city he had chosen not for any particular reason, but because the rent was manageable and the location put him within driving distance of a dozen major attractions worth filming. He had been running his channel for just over 5 years, building it slowly from a few hundred views per upload to a following of nearly 90,000 subscribers, all of them drawn in by the same kind of content: restricted areas, staff-only corridors, behind-the-scenes angles at theme parks, and entertainment venues that the public was never supposed to see. His videos were calm and unhurried, filmed in a low, quiet style that made each restricted space feel like a secret being shared directly with the viewer. And that intimacy was exactly what kept people coming back. The park had been on his list for months, specifically because of its summer finale fireworks show, which he believed would give him the kind of close ignition line footage that no one in his space had ever captured, something that would push him past the 100,000 subscriber mark he had been chasing for the better part of a year. He already had 90,000 subscribers. I mention that not to diminish him, but because I think it matters. He was not chasing millions. He was chasing 100,000, and he had been chasing it for years, and I think that patience and that hunger are both visible in what happened next. He arrived at the park that evening with a single camera and a plan he had thought about long enough to feel confident in. Staff called out to him as he moved deeper into the restricted area. Warning signs lined the walls in bold red lettering, and the lighting changed from the warm glow of the public zones to the flat, cold flicker of a service corridor that was never meant to be seen on camera. Staff called out to him. Signs lined the walls, even the lighting itself changed. I have covered a lot of these stories, and I cannot think of one where the environment did more to communicate danger. He walked through every single signal it gave him. He kept moving, kept narrating, kept the lens pointed forward, telling his audience he was about to show them something incredible. What he did not know was that a launch array 30 feet ahead had already been armed and was cycling through its automated pre-show diagnostic sequence, a routine test that, once initiated at the module level, would continue through its firing phase regardless of what was happening in the corridor around it. The sequence completed, and the array discharged. The live stream cut to black. Security teams reached him within minutes, pulling him from the restricted zone and calling for emergency medical support. But the damage done by the heat and the pressure and the gases in that enclosed corridor was not the kind that paramedics could reverse, and he went into cardiac arrest before he ever reached the medical station. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical examiner recorded the cause of death as thermal trauma and inhalation injury from close-range pyrotechnic exposure, with delayed evacuation from the corridor cited as a contributing factor. The investigation found no mechanical fault, no accidental misfire, only a man who had walked into the wrong place at the wrong time, and an automated system that had no way of knowing he was there. The park expanded its exclusion zones, reinforced its barriers, and introduced real-time access tracking across all restricted areas. The footage never published, the incredible shot he promised his audience never came, and the only record left was a dark screen and the sound of the feed going silent. Andrew walked into a corridor lined with warnings and kept going anyway. The next story begins differently, with an invitation, a sponsorship offer, and a man who had every reason to believe he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It was the 3rd of October, 2015 in Orlando. An amusement park's aging dark ride had been converted for a single overnight event. It has been running since the late 1990s, older than any of the guests who had been invited to film inside it. Adrian Vale was 27 years old, restless and determined, a YouTube horror creator who had spent years building a channel. And lately, it had been slipping, the views falling, the collaborations drying up, and Adrian had been feeling the anxiety of someone watching something they built begin to quietly come apart. His girlfriend, Maya, knew better than anyone how little he had been sleeping, how tightly he was holding on to the idea that the right upload could turn everything around. And when a limited overnight invitation arrived from the amusement park for the even, with a private word from a park representative that strong coverage could lead to a full sponsorship partnership, Adrian told his friends this was the kind of opportunity that changed everything, and he meant it completely. I noticed Adrian was invited. He had a representative who had spoken to him directly likely about a partnership. He did not sneak in, he walked through a door someone opened for him. Just after 1 a.m., the invited creators moved into the attraction in small groups, carrying flashlights and radio communicators. The event was built around puzzle sequences and staged blackouts and fake emergency announcements designed to blur the line between real and theatrical, which is exactly what made everything that followed so hard to untangle. During the second puzzle sequence, an actual power fault hit the system. Strobes fired unevenly, audio looped in some sections while others went silent, ride vehicles stopped mid-track while fog kept pouring in, and everyone inside, staff included, assumed for too long that it was part of the show. If the staff, the very people who were supposed to know the difference between the show and a real fault, could not tell either, I genuinely do not know how Adrian was supposed to. Adrian separated from his group while continuing to film, telling the others that real backstage footage would make for stronger content. He found a service access door hidden behind a themed wall panel and went through it, stepping into a maintenance corridor where technicians access the track systems and vehicle transfer equipment beneath the ride. At 23 minutes past 1, engineers in the control room began a partial reboot, believing all guests remained inside approved areas, and portions of the transfer system came back online in the dark, and Adrian's chest-mounted camera captured a sudden flash of metallic movement before the signal cut out entirely. Staff assumed for nearly 18 minutes that he had simply wandered off for better footage. Concerns only escalated when radio calls went unanswered and livestream viewers began asking why the feed had gone dead. Emergency responders located him inside the transfer bay shortly before 1:45 a.m. and pronounced him dead at the scene from fatal crush injuries sustained during unexpected transfer system movement. 18 minutes. Livestream viewers noticed before the staff did. I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because it is the detail that tells you most clearly how badly the accountability failed that night. The investigation found failures in how guests were tracked and monitored, how poorly the themed areas were separated from active machinery, and in how event staff and ride operators communicated with each other. The park closed permanently less than a month later, pending operational review and legal investigation.